Welcome, everybody, to the Insight Group's webinar on customers and the customer journey better. Over the next 50 minutes or so, we are going to be discussing how to better understand the ways to find, engage with, and take action, and what you can do as a marketer to learn from and influence this process. My name is Nick Johnson. I'm the founder of the Insight Group, and I am your host for the webinar. And the webinar's topic actually forms just one part of the agenda for this year's Insight Marketing Summit, which is happening on May the 17th and 18th in San Francisco. The event over two senior key theme of one-to-one marketing, the revolution in segmentation, targeting, and personalization. Download the brochure to find out what has been critical issues in marketing in 2016, as well as which brands will be sharing their insights with you in May. The web address for the conference website should be in the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Before we get started with, I do just want to remind you that we are webinar and receiving the audio recordings tomorrow. The webinar is also very much interactive, so we will have a number of anonymous polls taking place throughout the discussion, so please be involved. And I also really urge you to type in your own questions in the chat see on the right-hand side of your screen. Personal challenges. You can do this at any point, and I am going to be sure to incorporate those throughout. We're also using the hashtag #InsightSummit, which you can see at the top right of the slide. So again, any questions or additional thoughts, please do tweet those over to us. And now on to today's. So I'm delighted to introduce two panelists. The first is Eric Rasmussen, Vice President of Consumer Insights at GroupOn, and then we have Ryan Lauder, and Ryan is the Director of Consumer Engagement at TaylorMade. Welcome to you. So before we get started with the discussion and with that first poll, I'd like to let each of you briefly introduce yourself. Eric, if we go over to you first.
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Eric, we appear to have lost you, so I'm going to go to Ryan.
Ryan? I was playing around with my, I wasn't sure which one was muting or not there.
Well, now you're unmuted.
Okay, great. Doing the market research and consumer way back pre-internet days, was in television research, and then launched into running research for a company called GoTo.com. Evolved, which was the first one to bring about paid search or paid placement sponsored listings into the internet, and from there worked and ran research for a large section of Yahoo, ran research for eBay, and then Shutterfly, and I've been at GroupOn coming up on 5 years now, so very familiar with the customer journey and everything that's
fantastic. Well, we're very much looking forward to hearing from you. And Ryan, over to you.
Yeah, hi guys. So my name is Ryan Lauder. I am Director of Consumer Engagement with TaylorMade-Adidas Golf here in San Diego. We're part of the Adidas Group. We're a golf brand inside the golf category, inside the portfolio of Adidas brands. I've been with TaylorMade for about 17 years in Europe and now over here in San Diego. And yeah, my role is really focused on everything to do with the consumer with regards to communications, engagement, sort of data, as well as really anything that we can do to improve the way that we look at the consumer journey and how we offer through both retail and also direct through online sort of channels as well.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks very much, Ryan. And to kick, I'd like to just to the community, as it were, and ask you, our listeners, a question, and that's going to be in our first poll. So if we just share that poll screen now, you should see that on your screen. you feel that you're able to understand your customer journey. You have 4 options: very effectively, there is improvement required, or there is significant improvement required. So I'm going to give you 10 additional seconds to give us your answer on that particular topic. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. We will close the poll and take a look at the results. And it seems fairly obvious that we have picked a good topic for the webinar because the vast majority some improvement required. Eric, to you first. Do you want to give us your thoughts on these results?
I'm actually encouraged. I'd be very worried if everyone thought that they had the book hands completely. One of those holy grails, never really achieved goals. The customer journey is not only elusive, and it's always going to be difficult to understand all of it, but it's ever-changing. The environment that we're in right now, even if you were able to get to consider, like, yeah, I've got 80% of exactly knowing exactly what the customer journey is like, it's likely to change within the next 3 months. So it's kind of one of those things you should always be working on and ever refreshing. I find that encouraging.
Fantastic. Well, that's a positive look at them, certainly. Ryan, any things from you? Anything that jumps out from those results?
No, I think I share sort of Eric's view on that, and you know, we're certainly here at TaylorMade in that sort of 65% and even 10% sort of mode. And I think it depends on what sort of industry you're in and how your typical customer right now, whether you have access to the data and the information. So I think, as Eric said, it's encouraging that people still see this as a significant improvement, and they know huge benefits to be had when you do understand this a lot better. Looks like there's plenty of more topics of conversation around this for the future.
Yeah, at the risk of us both sounding like the typical researchers of ending every report with more research needed, but the reality is this is one of those areas where it is always, there's tremendous payback, better understanding the consumer journey, and it's the type of never fully achieved goal.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, well, thanks for that, guys. And let's jump into a couple of to start things off. Could each of you actually give a brief overview of the customer journey that people currently experience at GroupOn and at TaylorMade, who those customers are and how they currently interact with the brand? So let's go to you first, Eric. Can you give us some insight on that?
It's such a broad question, but I'll give you a sketch. Well, and first of all, I should qualify from our perspective, we look at the customer in 2 ways. We have obviously the customers that interact with the GroupOn brand, but as well we have the other side of our business, which would be the merchants that are also from our customers, and they have a very different relationship and you know, a different kind of interaction that we have to monitor, which in the end result means that I have doubled the amount of research because we have to do both sides. But for the purposes of this seminar or this webinar, let's talk about the consumer side. They interact with us from a variety of different ways. We are a unique brand. We've only been around still years, and even within that period of time, there's been a tremendous evolution in how consumers use us. We have, by the way, a really large segmentation done, so we understand all the different types of groups and how they're interacting. Just to complicate my answer more, again, being that annoying researcher that answers everything with, well, it depends. It depends on which group you're talking about, but they all interact in different ways. But I would say that the classic way was we were set up as an email kind of place where we would be reaching out and sending emails with different deals to our different users, and they would respond, see something that they like, and then purchase it through us, and we were basically acting as a conduit connecting merchants with consumers that were interested in the kinds of deals. We were basically a marketing tool. We have evolved tremendously, and our customer journey has changed and evolved because of that, so that we're now becoming more of a pull marketplace where people are going to us when they're thinking about, you know, interesting things to do, places to see, and ways to enrich their lives. So I better cut myself off there because I'll go on for another 5 minutes, because it is once you start digging in, it just becomes much, much more complex, but it's all very interesting stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you. And it's obvious that there's pretty considerable evolution there on the GroupOn side. Ryan, coming over to you, what does that customer journey look like at TaylorMade?
Yeah, I think as Eric said, we break it down between kind of the two audiences that we're looking at. So we have the direct audience, consumers who interact with us directly, purchase with us directly, either through our brick and mortar retail factory outlet stores or whether they're buying online. And then we have this, sort of 80% of our business, 90% of our business is the retail sort of wholesale channel. And I think we're just trying to really make some small steps in, areas that we know we have data and we can actually, garner sort of insights and understanding and learning. So we're starting really with the online. It's just a little bit easier to track a lot of that sort of movement. As soon as a golfer goes to a retail store to purchase the equipment, you have challenges and what they've purchased, when they purchased, where they purchased, how they were influenced as to what to purchase, etc., etc. So any sort of point that we have a direct interaction with that golfer, whether it be online or even through some retail executions like demo days, experiential events, things like that, where we can actually do the transaction there and then on site or track it somehow. So yeah, I think we're just trying to make some little steps and test and learn in smaller areas where we do have data and the information. But yeah, we very much have been an explore and buy kind of brand where we trying to expand across multiple marketing sort of channels and media mix, and then once people are actually purchasing, it's really hard for us to understand what led them to make that purchase and where they purchased and what piece of media or influence drove that purchase. So making small steps in small places, but when you have this kind of bridge between both retail and direct business, it becomes a bit of a challenge, and I'm sure there's companies on this call who are probably in a similar sort of boat. So I just make some of these small sort of pilot tests, just learn from there and go from there.
Sure, I see. And if we stick with you for this follow-up question, Ryan, so you touched a little bit there on exactly what you're doing in the first few steps. What is the core motivation, I suppose, behind really going into depth on what this customer journey is? What is it that you hope in an ideal world is going to be the big payoff?
Yeah, great question. So I think for sure we want to be more effective marketers. We want to be with our funds and our money, putting our focus and our resources to where it really truly matters, and that it can be a combination of building better awareness, getting better targeted marketing in that respect, or it can be actually making sure that you're driving an actual sale, so your cost is far more efficient. So I mean, ultimately what we're looking for is we're trying to improve our replenishment cycle with our golfers, so they're repeat purchasers. And if we know what their product they're using, we know what typically their replenishment cycle is, we know typically where they're purchasing, we know particularly what they're digesting and reading and what influences them, the journey a lot better. So I think really the first steps that we're looking at is everything from what kind of web analytics do we have, what kind of social data do we have. We have did and tested a couple of offline and online sort of campaigns, and there's tools that can allow you to do that, even working with like Google Odometry. You can look at how effective a TV campaign was in driving search term results immediately after that TV spot ran, things like that. You can experiment with call to action, CTAs, in sort of print, social, email, retail store, TV. So I think it's just what is available to you ultimately for us is a better advocacy for the brand, higher sort of repeat purchases, and then obviously having people become your influencers, recommending your product, and be able to track that as well through the whole sort of process.
Okay, I see. And Eric, are there any additional goals that you're looking for in a slightly different business and with a slightly different approach as GroupOn has, or are we broadly looking for the same things when it comes to this?
Yeah, it's remarkable similarities on goals and what we can do with those, but it's if you asked for a word, I would say it's being able to remain relevant to the customer and basically understand what their needs are and how can we better deliver that so that we're top of mind and always relevant, is something that that they're not just finding useful, but hopefully advocating for and enthusiastic about.
Okay, fine. And sticking with you, Eric, what has been the biggest challenge that you've faced when it comes to getting better at understanding the journey in the first instance?
Yeah, there's so many. I would say part of it was the description. So talking about something as a customer journey implies that something along like the lifetime from first awareness of the brand all the way to activation or adoption, and then going through at some point of tremendous enthusiasm to lower, and then is what I think of when someone says journey, and trying to measure that is difficult. Hopefully you don't have too much on the back end there as far as attrition. We try and measure the temperature of where our customers are and how they feel about the brand, and that is an ongoing and evolving thing. I'd say a lot of the challenges would be, for me, the fact that we're in so many, I mean, we're US and we're also 30 countries internationally, and that requires they're all unique, and we have to understand what's going on in each of them. And as you can imagine, vastly different experiences and also different cultures in each one of those. So a simple answer would be trying to keep all of that straight, because what you would come up with in the US is, yes, this makes sense, this is a marketing message for da-da-da-da-da. Very different thing in France, Germany, Italy, Brazil, Japan, etc.
Sure, I see. And Ryan, coming to you, if you're looking to give advice to somebody that is just starting out at really trying to crack this particular problem, what would you recommend is a sensible first step that one can take?
Just identifying somebody inside your business who is going to take ownership of this, because it does seem to, in other scenarios I've been in, fall between a variety of different departments. You need maybe data analytics from one team, or you might need some IT support from another. You might need the brand marketing team to step in and look at what they're doing. So I think it's just identifying like a project person who's going to take advantage of the opportunity here is in this customer journey. Number two is probably then to start small. Look at what do you have available to you, what vendors could you possibly use to help you deliver something, and actually start looking at what you can get your hands on, what information you can actually start to mine and take a look at to get some early learning. So I think what a lot of people try and do as well, they get paralysis, is they try and boil the ocean and just start with everything. When we always try to just look at small steps and say, well, okay, well, let's just take a look at the customer lifetime value of our online business. So let's take a look at how many accounts we have, what is the average spend per person per year, et cetera, and just look at how did they land on the site. Of course, it's very difficult to get beyond last click without some decent sort of tools to work with. But I would just really say to people, focus, give it somebody as their responsibility. Start small with some small tools and small data packets that you can get your hands on, and then just go from there and just learn from there, and it'll take you down a particular path that you want to go to that's going to give you the best bang for your buck.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Ryan. I do want to come back out to our listeners now and touch on a sort of a core topic that I think both Ryan and Eric brought up, which is that there is so much information that one could learn, and it's sensible to probably pick an initial focus. Something that many people did highlight in the build-up to the webinar was actually the difficulty in sharing that information and sharing the wealth, as it were, when it comes to the insights that do get surfaced from analyzing the customer journey. So ensuring that the right insights are delivered to the right departments to positively impact the decision-making is a pretty critical next step as you do begin to get an understanding of what that customer journey looks like. So to what extent, we're asking in this poll, does your company have an established framework of insight sharing with regards to your customer journey? So same as last time, you've got 4 options. Do you have a very well-established and functioning framework? Do you have an established framework that functions adequately? Is there a vague framework in place with improvement required, or is there no framework? So again, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to pick your answers here. So I'll go down from 5 now. So 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. We'll close the poll and let's take a look at what the results seem to be. Fantastic. Okay, so again, it looks like we have a leader here, which is that a vague framework is in place, but some improvement is required. And Ryan, I'll go to you first this time. What do these results look like to you?
I think if we take in relation to this one as well, I think people would like to think that they have a pretty decent idea, or at least some improvement required in terms of how they it. But when they take a look at now at the framework, it seems that there's a lot of room for improvement across all industries by the sounds of it. So and I think that's true. I mean, as a lot of research needs to be done in this sort of area. We understand very, very little in pockets around all of our kind of marketing mix and across all omni-channel sort of experiences. So I think it seems that like I say, it just requires focus in each of these businesses to say have somebody be responsible for providing driving forward this initiative to pull together the departments that have the information, surface those insights, provide some background insights, and then provide some direction. Look into this a little bit more, or we want to explore that a little bit more depth. And I think, again, there's so many vendors that provide data and information to companies. We have a multitude of those as well. Probably is what we're lacking is the pulling together of all of that data under one sort of roof. So as the whole social space has exploded, content marketing is exploding. We're all getting learnings, but is anyone actually pulling all of this together to understand how the end user is interacting with all of these tools, with all of these touch points, and providing that information back to for future direction and strategy?
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Ryan. And Eric, if we move on a little from that and we start to look at establishing that framework for sharing that insight, maybe it is the establishment of a particular department to look specifically at this sort of thing. What do you think are the most important first steps in establishing a framework for sharing insight from the customer journey? What does it look like? Who's involved?
Well, that's a big question. All the people that are involved in strategy research is most helpful when it's and consumer insights and understanding the customer journey. The earlier in the process that it is engaged and incorporated into it, all too often in my career, and especially on Silicon Valley, you're dealing with many entrepreneurs and engineer types that are not as familiar with research and/or that don't want to hear that their baby is ugly or that it needs improvement, and they oftentimes the personality traits that make a great entrepreneur are not the ones that are as open for taking feedback, and they tend to get up in the morning, look in the mirror and say, I know the customer and I know exactly what that customer looks like, and ironically they're looking in the mirror and say, and the customer looks just like this guy looking back at me. And is always a battle that we have between engineers and designers and stuff. It's a natural to want to do what I call marketing via the mirror. What research needs to do is help understand that, what everyone is not an urban hipster living in San Francisco. Our audience really looks more like this, and they have these kinds of needs, and they have this type of perception, and this is what they're thinking of, and this is the way that they navigate and the way that we can better interact with them. I know I'm kind of going off on a rant here, but incorporating all of these things into a group that's not as accustomed to them, I think you almost need to put some of this in as structural. So one of the things that I'm a big advocate of is trying to incorporate, similar to any big project that would be happening in a company, and people would say, wait a minute, did legal sign off on finance sign off on that? You need to have someone as the voice of the customer saying, wait a minute, did we get the customer sign off on this? In other words, do we have some data that either explicitly says this is good and or it needs to be looking like this, or at least from the data that we have, it indicates and kind of directs us towards doing something like this, as opposed to this is something the engineers dreamed up, or this is something that the CEO really thought of would be a great idea when talking to his buddies. And that helps structure for it, as opposed to all too often has happened in my career where I get a call from the engineers or someone saying, yeah, we got this concept, it's going to do X, Y, and Z, and you say, okay, that's great, I'd love to test that, we can create a different kind of stuff. What's the timeline? Like, well, we're rolling it out, we're launching it on Thursday. So it's like, well, at that point you kind of missed the boat. We're not going to be able to do much except tell you what people think of it when it's already, you know, the cattle's out of the barn. So earlier than better. That's a roundabout answer to the more you can incorporate this early, and then of course the interpretation of the data and the results. That's really the second half of the value that research can deliver. You can be a great research methodologist and great on statistics, but unless you can communicate this in an effective manner in a way that people can then say, oh, okay, I get it now. You've held my attention. You now have brought this to life, and now I know what the next steps are with these recommendations. Then it's kind of, you know, you're doing great academic research for your sound smart at a cocktail party. You're not really helping out the business.
I follow. And one of the things that really stood out for me, I think, from your answer there was this sense that it is absolutely critical to put the customer's voice into all of these decisions as well, and make sure that that's right at the center of any decision making in this particular space.
Absolutely.
There's one question actually that's just come in from Jeff Matuzzi in our audience, and it's for Ryan. And Ryan, the question is, how does TaylorMade measure the various journeys that people are going on from those two distinct groups that you mentioned earlier? And how have you identified the most common journeys, and then how do they, no pun intended, tailor their marketing or your marketing accordingly?
So is the question from a gentleman called Matucci, his second name?
It is indeed.
I'm hoping it's not Dav, who works in our business here, who may be trying to catch me out. So, yeah, so how do we do it right now, basically, is the overarching question.
Really?
Yes? Is that the overarching question,
Yeah.
Nick?
Yes, it is. It is.
Yeah, so I think, again, as I said earlier, we try and look at what we can control. So really most of the traffic and online sort of interactions with the golfer. So we can do a decent job there from tracking, you know, like the web analytics of how people are landing on the site, where they came from, where the referring domains were. So that's a very sort of basic kind of, you know, almost like last click kind of stuff. We're trying to work with our retail partners to get a better understanding about when they have come into retail and have purchased the product, to ask questions about, you know, hey, how did you learn about the product? Did you, you know, is this a long kind of period from 3 months of hearing about the product to testing it, to considering 4 or 5 other brands, to trying it out, you know, et cetera, et cetera. We just have such a diverse, I guess, sort of landscape. Year-old, you know, male golfers, 5-year-old female golfers purchasing our products across the world. It becomes very, very difficult to sort of get a feel for that. But as I said earlier, we're doing a mix of social content, on-domain, off-domain, you know, advertising, display, and all that kind of stuff to try and really look at how people are interacting with our brand and our sort of content, how they're looking at their influences from whether it be media reviews in titles and magazines. So we're trying to just gather as much information as we can, working with media partners, working with retail partners, but it is very, very difficult. So we're really starting with what we can control right now, which is really most of the direct business, and and hopefully we can then extrapolate from there. So we have 1 million social audience. We will survey that social audience from time to time and ask them sort of questions. And, you know, again, I don't think brands do this enough. You know, you have very much a loyal following in general across your social audience, and you know, ask them questions. Well, they will give you answers for sure. And even on an email database questionnaire, understand what device they're on, you know, what media they're consuming, how often they purchase, do they take advice of a professional golfer, like a pro, or do they take advice of their buddy on the golf course on a Saturday afternoon? Ask people the questions, and you know, your loyal audience will give you the answer. So we try and start with what we can control and learn from there, and then kind of assume and extrapolate that that is going to be fairly similar, albeit the transaction is happening at a different place, like offline at a retail store. Because we're such a fragmented business that it is difficult for us to reach out to 4 or 5 of our strategic partners and have them share a lot of that data. So we start internally with ourselves, the short answer.
Okay, and just to build on that, to what extent are you able to actually use that the learnings that you're gathering there and actually do tailored and somewhat more personalized and unique outreach to those customer groups?
Yeah, so we're probably not as advanced as many sort of people on this call in terms of email personalization. We are trying to, so my team is, we're going to be putting up a community, an on-domain community in the foreseeable future in the next couple of months. With the goal there really is to better understand people who want to interact with us, look at logging in, what's in their bags, they can tell us they're currently playing competitor products. And then from that point, we'll better understand, at a personal level or individual level, how to attack sort of people. Our email campaign is still fairly sort of generic. We haven't yet quite got into the realms of personalization. But again, our online business is only 10-15% of our total revenue, so we still are heavy focused on our retail partners. But even from a social standpoint, we're using our analytics tool a lot to look at influencers. We're using our tool to even look at what content people are, kind of clicking on, resonating with. Every now and again, we'll go outside of our Facebook audience to lookalikes, gain new fans, look at insights from people who are not fans. So yeah, we're probably in that sort of quartile that's down in the. We have semi-framework, but there's a lot of room for improvement for sure.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Ryan. And I have just had another question come in from the audience, and please do, everybody, continue sending those in, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. And this question I'm going to push through to Eric, and it's a question from Mary Grace McLeroy, and it's about how do you visually map the journey, the customer journey that you understand for your marketing team? Is this something that you put up on a wall somewhere so people keep an eye on at all times, Eric?
Great question. To say that we have it just beautifully laid out in front of on the, and there's this entry into the brand, and it goes to this point. I'd say that it really depends. Well, for that we tend to work off of the segments, and the segments are based on both their needs and their interaction with our brand. Now, we realize that certain people or certain segments represent different stages in that evolution. For instance, we've got one group that is, well, we call them the groupies, and that's because they are just overwhelmingly enthusiastic and love everything and any concept that we test, or kind of an over-the-top love-in. And then there's another group, well, we have 6 different segments, but another group that is clearly you can tell that they were at one time a groupie, and then either from burnout or a bad experience or something, they're less enamored. So rather than try and map that, because I'd say most of the people that are groupies, they stay in that groupie one. So to say that there is one customer journey that fits our entire group would be an oversimplification and probably send us down the wrong path. We have different marketing messages, different ways that we treat the different segments. And that's been very effective for us, and we've also been able to overlay this onto our customer database. So when we're going out and not just but also in what kinds of deals, we know that a certain group is all about food and drink, and another group is all about exploring new places and checking out new things. So you obviously market accordingly, and that's been very effective. Now, some people will transition from one into another segment, but since a lot of that is about their quality and their core needs, like some people are more adventurous than others, and they're likely to stay that way. So that's what we more than a kind of a, well, they're at this stage, they're 6 months along in their relationship with our brand, so in another 6 months we're going to treat them in this way. It's not so much that. It may be different for a lot of different types of products. For instance, when I was at Shutterfly, there was much more of the customer, because you'd be like, okay, they got their marriage coming up, so they're going to do all these kinds of wedding gifts and wedding pictures and photo books, and then a year or two after that, they're probably going to have the kid pictures coming along, and so on and so on. Ours is a little bit different than that.
Okay, thanks, Eric. I'd like to open up our third and our final poll now, actually, to everybody, and that builds on a couple of things that Eric and Ryan have just been mentioning. So, to what extent are you all able to customize your own messages and your own customer experiences throughout the customer journey for different types of customers based on those insights that you're collecting from them? And again, there are 4 options for you. We're using almost all of our insight into the customer journey to customize experiences. Second, we're using most of that insight into customers to customize those experiences. Third, we're using some. And then fourth, we're not currently acting on any of our insights into the customer journey. So again, I'm going to give everybody 5 more seconds to give us your answers. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fantastic. Okay, and if we just share those results with everybody now, I think what you will find is, again, our third option has come up in first place, using some of our insights to personalize experiences. Eric, does that surprise you, or does that pretty much seem par for the course right now?
I applaud the humility of this group, and but also goes back to sample. I would suspect that the people that would put themselves in the number 1, I've got it all figured out, they're probably not bothering listening to webinars because they think they already have it all. The reality is I would put this in as one of those that you're never really going to get it all. So anyone who's putting themselves in that top category, webinar is delusional. I think that there are certain limitations on the tools available, but yeah, the more that you can, this all goes back to relevance. The more to customize and personalize your messaging and your product and every interaction that you have with your customer base, the more it improves. Our customers are becoming, gone are the days when you can one size fits all. The consumers now understand that, listen, I've given you my information, or I've been to your site enough, you should have a good understanding of what I like and what I don't. I'll use the Amazon example of, I purchased a Barbie for one of my nieces years ago, and for several years after, when they were in high school, I was still getting things about, hey, buy some more Barbie accessories. It's like, no, this is really, you should understand we're past it at this point. That's actually, I get, every time I use that example, I've got a friend who worked at Amazon and says, no, time ago, stop using that example. But point being that the more you can personalize, the greater the consumer engagement. I think consumers today just have much less tolerance for companies that are working off of, kind of 1990s technology and personalization integration.
Fantastic. Thanks, Eric. I think I read something within the last couple of months pointing out that today's consumers see, I think, over 300 individual marketing messages on a daily basis. So I think it's pretty fair to say that spray and pay campaigns are probably being decimated in their effectiveness right now. If we look to the future, Ryan, I'd like to come to you. Do you see any big changes on the horizon with regards to how we understand the customer journey? Are that's coming online that we can use, or new tools to actually manipulate that information to be more agile in terms of the experiences that we deliver?
Yeah, I think I said earlier that companies need to just have this resource and this, focus in-house and have one true source of that information and the data sites. And I don't know if many, many companies do actually have that. So I think going forward, you'll see it as an actual job title coming up a lot more in people's areas, and less so market research or the insights group, and a little bit more actually, genuine direct customer journey sort of specialist, and I'm sure there'll be some funky titles coming in the future for sure. I think there'll be more vendors providing a lot more value rather than providing like kind of surrounding sort of data around like pockets of this kind of stuff, but actually providing that as a overarching kind of umbrella platform which you can sort of tap into and have all of the data. I'm sure that's already existing right now, but I think it'll just be more prevalent for sure. I just wanted to quickly, reference again, Mary Grace's question, Eric answered with regards to the visual aspect of your customer journey. I think it's truly important that if you don't have a visual representation of what you think your journey is right now for your customers, then you're going to basically be, in the space of like drifting from your core strategy and your core sort of, objectives. So we have, again, without giving any secrets away, we might have a media agency come in and pitch, and then a creative agency will come in, and then another sort of partner might come in, and everyone's giving a different viewpoint as to what they think is the customer journey for our golfers. And I think, you as the company, as a brand, need to sort of take charge of that and have a true source and true piece of information. And doing that visually is one of the best ways of doing that, and making sure people are reminded of that. So when we're doing projects or campaigns or whatever it may be, that you're focusing your attention on the right things that are going to matter. Otherwise, I think as Eric said earlier, maybe the CEO wants to do something, or an engineer wants to do something, and then you just drift, and then you're just really not serving any sort of purpose. So I think it's very important to have that visual representation as accurate as you can get it, and then update it every sort of 6 to 12 months.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ryan. And actually that brings me to another question from Linda Howes in our audience, which is basically touching on exactly how successful you guys, I suppose, are at doing that. So to what extent do you treat different customer segments based on a sort of pre-existing perception of who is in those groups versus what the customers have told you passively or actively, their own needs and their wants? Where do you sort of fall on that scale right now? And Ryan, I'll come to you first because we just finished up on that point.
Yeah, I'd be perfectly honest. We're in the scale of we will kind of group people in areas that we think they should be based on the information that we have. I don't think we do enough outbound sort of research to sort of actually validate those. We might have, surveys, every couple of years to validate some of that. But, yeah, we just don't have the level of information to kind of really micromanage that into real specific groups. So I would imagine that a lot of people are in the same sort of boat where they've got, some information, some insights, and then they're putting, those customers into various buckets and then marketing and targeting that sort of way. But to Eric's point, I mean, the more information that you have, the more data you can look at, the more sort of like, targeted you can possibly be. But it takes resource, it takes focus, and it takes resource. And I think a lot of companies are struggling from that to understand what is the value of this. So that's the way you have to start with some of these smaller projects to look at, right, here's what the anticipated value is. Let's test it, let's learn, and let's get some results of this targeted loyalty campaign. How much did it drive a repeat purchase? And then go from there. You have something then to show the CFO or the CMO that actually this is going to make some resource to do this on a wider scale.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. And Eric, same question to you. Where would you put GroupOn on that? Having treating people based on a predisposed understanding of who those and based exclusively on the data that they're generating for you.
Great question. One which is very timely too. For those not following GroupOn closely, we've had a administration change in the past 6 months, and that represents someone who's much closer to the research findings and is incorporating those in kind of everything that we did. Not to knock the old, but the previous administration kind of had an attitude more of it's about the discount, and people come to us for the discounts, which is largely an attitude that I get from the press all the time, and I spend a lot of time in seminars and presentations saying, no, actually our user base over-indexes on income and education. It's not about the discount, it's about the discovery. And we found both from our research testing, concept testing, and doing different experiments that we can go from a 50% discount to a much lower discount and hardly lose any pickup at all. The discovery, our users can afford full price what they is the vetting of different places and discovery. You know, we get a frequent kind of comment back from our users saying like, thank you GroupOn for allowing me to be a tourist in my own city. So it's this is a great example where if we had continued on down that track, we would have gone with a very different type of merchant that we would be bringing in, also a very different kind of marketing message. And so we've kind of realigned in many ways, and we're going forward, and it's been working out great for us.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Eric. And just to stick with you and go to that future-looking question, do you see any major changes on the horizon with regards to the data that you can collect, how you understand those customers, and how you can be more agile in responding to them?
Well, I think that there's always more you can do. We have always trying to create a balance between too much touch where we become an annoyance and not enough to where our finger's not on the pulse for both sides, and consumer and merchant. We tend to, I think, strike a balance where we're getting back, whenever they have an interaction, a purchase, we're always we have a follow-up satisfaction study. We really want to understand how we're doing on a number of different levels there, and we broadly share that out with the entire company. So it is kind of our North Star. Every month there is a published report, and it's hung up in all the different branches of GroupOn where this is how we did this month, and this is where the customer satisfaction level is. And no, we don't use NPS. That's a whole nother seminar. I can talk about the evils of NPS, but basically showing what the consumers are thinking about us and how we can dig into that a little bit deeper. So at any given time, I've got a bunch of different research studies going on, and we try and incorporate all those findings and feedback, throw that out as broadly as possible.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And I'd have to give us our final question, and again, this comes from an audience member. This is from Ulrich Barth, and I'm going to open this up to both of you. And Ryan, I'll start with you. What is your advice for businesses that don't have online sales or CRM interactions with their customers? What would you say?
Oh, thanks for that question, Nick. That's a tough one. I think you have to clearly just then work in partnership with your wholesale channel if you are working through retailers. So if you don't have an online presence or any sort of CRM tool, you basically, like you're a B2B house or something like that, you have to have that relationship then with your partners to say, look, the more we work together and understand how our products and our services are being marketed and sold to the end consumer buying those products and services, the better we can serve you as a customer, from the B2B standpoint. So I think you've got to build that partnership and that level of trust with the information and the data, because otherwise, I mean, you are kind of going blind a little bit, and again, I've seen plenty of examples of this, of sample sizes of one, where if someone comes back from a session or an event or a meeting or whatever and says, hey, I just heard this, and someone doesn't like that, so we need to do this. I'm like, well, is that based on one person's opinion? So I think you just need to have that information available to make that sort of a decision. So I would, as we're trying to do with some of our retailers, is like have this level of trust of sharing of information, that our success is their success and vice versa. So the better we understand how people are coming into a retail store, we better understand how frequent their purchase is, what value that purchase is, what their challenges with their product, did they have the information when they walked in, did they get the information from the retail associate? So got to have that relationship and just work together for a mutual sort of benefit.
Cool. Great. Thank you, Ryan. And Eric, do you have any advice for Ulrich?
Just if I was in that situation, I've been in the internet space now for longer than I care to admit to, but if I was in that situation, what I would really recommend is contact a research vendor who would be able to do, depending upon the product, of course, but assuming it's something that has some national reach, you can go out and have them do a study to better understand your product and find out a user base there that would give you a better landscape of who's using it, what their consideration set is. In other words, understand what the pros and cons are of your product versus the competition, and then use that data in with your retail affiliates. So it is an added value, so you can approach to them and say, listen, I'm going to tell you not just something about our consumers, which you'll use for internal learning, but also how they're relating to you as the retailer so that you can augment and make for a better experience with them. So you're not just showing up saying, hey, sell more of this stuff, but you're actually giving them some added value because they're probably not going out and doing any research, and it would be a win-win situation for the consumer and for you and the retailer.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Eric, for answering that on Ulrich's behalf. And thank you again to both Eric and to Ryan for their answers and their insight and their time today. Unfortunately, given the time, it is now the end of our questions and of the webinar, so apologies if I was unable to get round to your question. I would, of course, like to thank our speakers for their contributions. And before everyone leaves to get their first or indeed their last coffee of the day, depending on where you are around the world, we will be sending out the recording of this webinar tomorrow, so no need to worry if you did miss any particular parts of the discussion. And what is more, the numerous other questions that you may well still have on the wider question of one-to-one marketing in 2016 and beyond can be answered in person at this year's Insight together a marketing and digital space in San Francisco on May the 17th and the 18th. You should be able to see on your screen now some of the brands that are going to be speaking and sharing their best practice at the summit, and I have also just sent for you all to download the summit brochure. That's in the chat box for you, so do be sure to grab yourself a copy and check out the full speaker lineup and the topics on the day. So thank you once again to every speakers. I hope everybody has